please now welcome our next speaker, Michelle Boulos, and her thesis, The $20 Father, a call for the removal of Andrew Jackson from the $20 bill.
What do you see when you look at the face of a $20 bill? Is it the cunning champion of the common man, here to represent the once unrepresented? Or is it the ethnic cleanser, the conductor of the Trail of Tears? Andrew Jackson was a man of complexity and contradiction. He symbolized the darkest chapters of our history while embodying the American opportunity of success from humble beginnings. However, the symbols on our currency matter, for it is a message that we send around the world. It is a powerful means of communication. It is a message of national identity that illustrates who we are and our common purpose. The figures that adorn our currency show who America thinks it is. So, with only 6 bills in circulation, who should represent us? Circulating $20 bills had once featured the faces of Abraham Lincoln, Alexander Hamilton, Grover Cleveland, and even Pocahontas. It wasn't until the late 1920s that Andrew Jackson, the slave owner, would make his debut on the $20 bill. However, the records of the Department of Treasury do not state why any figure has been chosen to be on this bill. Through his rather controversial legacy, Jackson would be announced to be removed from the $20 bill in 2016. But the redesign was halted once the next administration had assumed office, as it was deemed to be a decision by mere political correctness. However, I believe one should recognize Jackson's denouncement as deserving, for his conscious efforts to violate constitutionally bound systems and enact moral injustices makes him ineligible to be on our bills. Once he was inaugurated in 1829, Andrew Jackson would begin his intentional reconstruction of a more powerful executive branch. He overrode Supreme Court decisions in Indian removal, state rights to consider legislation null and void in federal tariffs, and Congress in his use of the veto, particularly in the recharter of the National Bank. One must consider that the very notion of checks and balances is to ensure that no branch prevails the rest. Jackson's agenda to completely transform the way that the government had functioned was what George Washington had warned about in his farewell address. He had suspected that at least one branch may prevail the rest, and that this would be the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. By his oath of office, it is not only Jackson's imperative task, but his duty to protect the 3-branch system. For this system was made by our founding fathers to combat the threatening tyrannical leader. Since Jackson had assumed supremacy over the other branches, he does what George Washington had warned about specifically. Jackson destroys the established governmental process, but this assumption of supremacy did not go unnoticed. By 1833, Andrew Jackson would be called King Andrew, as his demonstration of power without congressional approval became recognized once he refused to recharter the National Bank. In an attempt to amend the disparity between social classes, Andrew Jackson abolished the National Bank by ways of veto. He had believed that the banks demonstrated the power of the elitist over the will of the common man. But Jackson was a hypocrite. While the elitists may be threatening in their status, Jackson was no less threatening in his assumption of power. For he himself had once even stated that elitists too often bend the acts of government for their own selfish purposes. However, didn't Jackson bend constitutionally guarded systems? Didn't Jackson act by his hatred of elitists, by his selfish purposes? Jackson was no champion of the common man. He was a champion of himself. For he had not only believed that he was above the law, but that he was the law itself. Moreover, his expansion of executive power was a tool to satisfy his own political desires. No longer was Jackson one component of the three-branch system. He had tyrannically bent the American government. Jackson was literally a president at odds with his government. As some may suggest that Andrew Jackson racism was not unique in consideration with the others who adorn our bills, one must also recognize that Andrew Jackson's racial hatred was murderous, distinctive to only him. At the core of his legacy, Jackson took on the role as an ethnic cleanser. He fiercely initiated and supported the removal of the Indians, even in the Worcester versus Georgia case, where Samuel A. Worcester sued the state of Georgia for enacting upon the Indian Removal Act when treaties had been signed to protect their rights to the land, posed as a way for Andrew Jackson to reconsider his actions. But he mockingly retaliated, stating, "John Marshall made his decision, now let him enforce it." Furthermore, Jackson's relentless hatred towards the Indians struck through most. For Jackson may not have invented the scheme of relocation, but he stopped at nothing to rid the land of Indian presence. For Jackson was thoroughly aware of what was necessary to rid the land of Georgia from Indians. He and his administration welcomed and even encouraged the deadly plan that became known as the Trail of Tears, a 5,000-mile journey. They advocated and led campaigns in Alabama and Georgia, where they had pleaded that the lands in question belonged to Georgia. She must and she will have them. Moreover, slavery may have been considered to be somewhat acceptable at the time, but even the Supreme Court was able to recognize Jackson's immorality in his legislation. Through a 5-1 ruling in Worcester versus Georgia case, it is abundantly clear that it is of the minority who could not consider the humanity of the Indians. It is the patriotic and wise man's duty to ensure that we send the right messages. Our currency should be embellished with promises of freedom, liberty, and happiness, not of an authoritarian. Jackson's betrayal of the American government and humanity makes him ineligible to be on our bills, for he had a strong will that was of personal and political selfishness. As he challenged the limits of the executive branch, he unequivocally failed his duty to the Constitution. Our currency should resemble a nation that treasures their Constitution and the government our founding fathers created. But Jackson's legacy was one of villainy. So, what message should we really send the world? Thank you.